Somebody typed a simple question into an AI chatbot called Grok. Can humans live forever? Nothing dramatic, nothing designed to go viral. And yet the answer that came back has been quietly unsettling scientists, biologists, and longevity researchers ever since it started spreading online. It was not a science fiction fantasy. It was not a dramatic prediction about robots or uploaded minds. It was something far more grounded and, honestly, far more disturbing, because it forced people to confront a question most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. What actually happens to a human body as it grows old? And is there truly a wall we cannot climb over, no matter how advanced our medicine becomes? Before we go further, if questions about the future of the human body in mind fascinate you as much as they fascinate us, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the like button right now, because this channel exists to explore exactly these kinds of unsettling frontiers of science. Let us start with the basic version of the question everyone eventually asks: how long can a human body actually last? For most of history, the answer was simple and brutal. Disease, famine, violence, and poor sanitation killed most people long before old age ever became a concern. But over the last 2 centuries, something remarkable happened. Average life expectancy climbed steadily, decade after decade, as sanitation improved, vaccines spread, and modern medicine tackled one deadly disease after another. This steady climb led some optimistic scientists to believe there was no ceiling at all. If we could push life expectancy from 35 years in the 1800s to over 80 years today, why would progress ever stop? Surely, given enough time and enough medical breakthroughs, humans could eventually push past 100, then 150, and maybe even further. But here is where the picture gets uncomfortable, and where Grok's answer reportedly aligned with a growing body of hard scientific evidence that many people simply are not aware of. Unlike average life expectancy, which reflects how long a typical person lives, maximum lifespan measures the absolute upper limit that any human has ever reached. And this number tells a very different story. The longest confirmed human lifespan on record belongs to a French woman named Jeanne Calment, who died in 1997 at the age of 122. That record has stood for nearly 3 decades, despite every advancement in modern medicine, nutrition science, and healthcare technology that has emerged since then. No one, anywhere on the planet, with access to any level of medical care, has managed to surpass her age. Researchers studying global demographic data have found something striking. Improvements in survival rates tend to level off dramatically after the age of 100. The odds of surviving another year, once you cross that threshold, barely improve at all compared to younger ages, no matter how much healthier and wealthier modern society becomes. This pattern strongly suggests that human maximum lifespan is not simply a reflection of poor healthcare or preventable disease. In 2024, a major study published in the journal Nature Aging analyzed life expectancy trends across the world's longest living countries and reached an unsettling conclusion. Despite decades of continued medical innovation, improvements in life expectancy in these nations have been slowing down, not speeding up. The researchers behind the study stated plainly that there's really no credible evidence suggesting large numbers of people will be routinely surviving past 100 any time in the near future, let alone achieving anything resembling immortality. This is precisely the kind of blunt, uncomfortable answer that reportedly emerged when Grok was asked directly whether humans could live forever. Rather than offering an optimistic techno-futurist fantasy, the response reportedly leaned heavily into the biological reality that aging is not simply one disease we can eventually cure. To understand why this makes true immortality so devastatingly difficult, we need to look at what actually happens inside our cells as we age. Our DNA accumulates mutations over time, some caused by environmental exposure, and some simply by the imperfect nature of cell division itself. Our cells contain structures called telomeres, protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes that shorten slightly every time a cell divides. Eventually, these telomeres become so short that cells can no longer divide safely, triggering a state called senescence, where cells stop functioning properly but refuse to die, instead releasing inflammatory signals that damage surrounding healthy tissue. At the same time, our mitochondria, the tiny structures inside cells responsible for producing energy, gradually become less new threats and more prone to mistakenly attacking our own healthy tissue. Our stem cell populations, responsible for repairing and regenerating damaged tissue throughout our lives, slowly deplete and lose their regenerative capacity. Dozens of interconnected failure points happening simultaneously, each one accelerating the others in a vicious cycle that researchers call the hallmarks of aging. This is precisely why curing aging is fundamentally different from curing a single disease like smallpox or polio. There is no single villain to defeat. There are dozens of villains, all attacking at once, all reinforcing each other's damage. In 2021, a team of researchers from Singapore, Russia, and the United States built a sophisticated computer model analyzing something called resilience, essentially how well the human body bounces back from stress, illness, and injury as it ages. Their model calculated that even under theoretically perfect biological circumstances, with no disease, no accidents, and flawless genetics, human resilience would eventually decline so completely that the body simply could not recover from ordinary physiological stress. Their model placed this absolute upper limit at approximately 150 years old. This means that even in a world with perfect nutrition, zero disease, and constant medical care, the researchers concluded that the human body would eventually reach a point where it could no longer maintain what scientists call homeostasis, the delicate internal balance required to keep every biological system functioning correctly together. Now here is where the story takes an unexpected turn, and where things get genuinely fascinating rather than simply grim. While human biology appears to have this hard ceiling, nature has already produced creatures that seem to have found a loophole around aging entirely. Consider a tiny, almost microscopic creature called Turritopsis dohrnii, more commonly known as the immortal jellyfish. This remarkable animal has developed an extraordinary biological trick. When faced with old age, injury, or environmental stress, instead of dying, it can revert its own cells backward through a process called transdifferentiation, essentially transforming its mature cells back into an earlier developmental stage and restarting its entire life cycle from scratch. In theory, this process can repeat indefinitely, meaning this jellyfish does not truly have a maximum lifespan at all, at least not one determined by internal aging. Scientists studying this jellyfish have identified specific genetic pathways related to DNA repair, stem cell renewal, and cellular regeneration that appear to give it this unusual capability. Researchers hope that understanding these exact mechanisms at a molecular level could eventually inform therapies that help human cells repair themselves more effectively, even if achieving true biological reversal in humans remains an enormous scientific challenge. This is precisely the kind of research that keeps serious longevity scientists optimistic, even while they remain deeply skeptical of the idea that humans will simply live forever anytime soon. Current anti-aging research is largely focused not on eliminating death entirely, but on compressing what researchers call morbidity, meaning the number of years someone spends suffering from chronic disease and physical decline before death. The goal for most legitimate longevity scientists is not eternal life. It is a longer healthy life, followed by a much shorter period of decline at the very end. Several promising areas of research are already showing real results in laboratory settings. Drugs like rapamycin, originally developed as an immune suppressant for organ transplant patients, have shown surprising anti-aging effects in animal studies, extending lifespan in mice by activating cellular pathways related to nutrient sensing and cellular repair. Senolytic drugs, designed specifically to clear out senescent cells, those zombie-like cells that refuse to die and cause chronic inflammation, are currently being tested in human clinical trials, with early results suggesting they may reduce certain age-related conditions in specific patient populations. Scientists are also exploring partial cellular reprogramming, a technique that attempts to reset certain aging markers within cells, without fully reverting them to an embryonic state, which would be both impractical and dangerous in a living human body. Early experiments in mice have shown promising signs of restored vision and improved tissue function using this approach, though translating this safely into human treatments remains years, possibly decades, away from clinical reality. So where does this leave the original disturbing question? Can humans actually live forever? Based on everything current biology, demographic data, and cellular science tells us, the honest answer researchers keep arriving at, and reportedly the same conclusion Grok reached when directly asked, is no, not with our current biological architecture, and probably not without a genuinely revolutionary breakthrough that fundamentally changes how human cells repair and regenerate themselves at a molecular level. This is precisely why the answer disturbed so many people online. It was not because Grok predicted some terrifying dystopian future. It was because it delivered a calm, data-driven confirmation of something most of us try very hard not to think about too deeply, that death, in some form, appears to be built directly into the biological blueprint of what makes us human in the first place. If this kind of deep dive into the uncomfortable science behind aging, biology, and the limits of the human body is exactly what you come to this channel for, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, because we have many more unsettling scientific questions like this one waiting to be explored. But there is a more hopeful way to look at all of this, one that many longevity researchers themselves genuinely believe in. Even if true immortality remains biologically impossible with our current understanding of cellular science, the gap between our current maximum lifespan and what might theoretically be achievable through future medical breakthroughs is still enormous. Extending healthy human life by even 20 or 30 additional years, free from the chronic diseases that currently define old age, would represent one of the greatest achievements in the history of medicine, even without ever reaching anything resembling eternal life. Researchers studying centenarians, people who live past the age of 100, have found that many of them share specific genetic variants that appear to protect against age-related diseases like heart disease, cancer, and cognitive decline. Understanding exactly how these protective genes function could eventually lead to targeted therapies that help ordinary people benefit from the same biological advantages, without requiring the genetic lottery that centenarians happen to win naturally. There's also a growing field of research focused specifically on what scientists call the hallmarks of aging, a framework identifying the core biological processes responsible for cellular decline. These include genomic instability, telomere shortening, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and several other interconnected mechanisms. By targeting multiple hallmarks simultaneously, rather than focusing on just one, researchers hope to eventually develop combination therapies that address aging more holistically, rather than simply treating individual diseases as they emerge one at a time. It is worth remembering that many transformative medical breakthroughs once seemed just as impossible as defeating aging does today. Organ transplants, vaccines, antibiotics, and cancer immunotherapy all seemed like science fiction fantasies to previous generations of scientists, until persistent research eventually turned them into standard medical practice. This does not guarantee that immortality will ever be achieved, but it does suggest that dismissing all longevity research as pure fantasy would be equally short-sighted. Perhaps the most important lesson from Grok's disturbing answer is not that humans are doomed to a fixed biological ceiling, but that we should approach the science of aging with both humility and genuine curiosity. The question of whether humans can live forever forces us to confront the messy, complicated, deeply interconnected biology that makes us who we are and reminds us that even our most advanced artificial intelligence systems, when asked honestly, still have to defer to the hard limits of biological reality, at least for now. So the next time you hear a bold claim about humans achieving immortality within our lifetime, remember what the actual science tells us. Remember Jeanne Calment's unbroken record. Remember the hallmarks of aging working against us simultaneously. And remember that even the immortal jellyfish, for all its biological tricks, still faces predators and disease in the real world, proving that even nature's closest attempt at defeating death is far from a perfect solution. Let us dig a little deeper into why this question has become so much more urgent in recent years, because it is not simply an abstract philosophical puzzle anymore. Billions of dollars are now flowing into longevity research from some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the tech industry. Silicon Valley billionaires have quietly funded biotech startups dedicated entirely to reversing aging, extending human lifespan, and in some cases, openly pursuing the goal of what researchers politely call radical life extension. This growing financial interest is precisely why questions like the one posed to Grok are no longer confined to science fiction, conventions, and philosophy classrooms. They are being asked in boardrooms, research labs, and increasingly directly to powerful artificial intelligence systems trained on massive amounts of scientific literature. This raises an interesting question about how exactly an AI model like Grok would even approach answering something this complex. Unlike a human expert who might soften an uncomfortable answer with hedging language or optimistic framing, large language models trained to prioritize direct, evidence-based responses tend to synthesize the weight of available scientific literature rather bluntly. When the overwhelming majority of peer-reviewed research points toward a fixed biological ceiling, somewhere between 120 and 150 years, an AI system pulling from that body of evidence is likely to reflect that consensus clearly, without much comforting nuance attached. This is worth keeping in mind whenever we discuss AI-generated answers to deep existential questions. The response is not some mystical prophecy pulled from nowhere. It is essentially a reflection of the current scientific consensus, compressed into a conversational format. When that consensus happens to be uncomfortable, the AI's answer will naturally feel uncomfortable too, not because the AI has some special insight into human mortality, but because it is accurately summarizing what actual biologists and demographers have already been saying in academic journals for years. That said, it is important to acknowledge the other side of this ongoing scientific debate, because not every researcher agrees that human lifespan is permanently capped. Some demographers point to a long history of failed predictions about lifespan limits. Throughout the 20th century, various scientists confidently declared that life expectancy could not possibly rise past certain thresholds, only to watch those thresholds get broken within just a few years as medical advances continued unexpectedly. Researchers studying historical trends have noted that record-setting national life expectancy figures have climbed at a remarkably consistent pace of roughly 2.5 years per decade since the 1840s, with no clear sign of permanently stopping. This creates a genuine and unresolved scientific tension. On one side, demographic data on maximum individual lifespan strongly suggests a hard ceiling somewhere around 120 to 150 years. On the other side, average life expectancy across entire populations keeps climbing steadily, suggesting that whatever biological limit exists, we have not yet fully explored every possible medical intervention that might push against it. Both of these observations can be true simultaneously, and reconciling them is one of the most actively debated topics in modern biogerontology. It is also worth exploring what scientists mean when they talk about compressing morbidity, because this concept fundamentally reframes the entire immortality conversation in a more useful direction, rather than asking whether humans can live forever, most serious. Longevity researchers are instead asking a more practical question. Can we extend the number of healthy, active years a person enjoys, while compressing the period of frailty, disease, and decline into a much shorter window right at the very end of life? This distinction matters enormously, because it shifts the entire scientific goal away from chasing eternal life and towards something far more achievable and arguably far more valuable. Imagine a future where people commonly remain physically active, mentally sharp, and largely disease-free well into their 90s or beyond, before experiencing a relatively brief period of decline just before natural death. This would represent an enormous improvement in quality of life for billions of people, even without ever approaching anything resembling true immortality. Several biotech companies are already pursuing exactly this kind of research, often quietly, away from the sensational headlines that typically accompany discussions of eternal life. Companies focused on cellular reprogramming are studying how specific genetic factors, when carefully controlled, can partially reset the biological age of cells without fully erasing their specialized function. Early experiments conducted on laboratory mice have shown some genuinely remarkable results, including partial restoration of vision in aged animals and improved markers of tissue health, though researchers are quick to caution that translating these results safely into human treatments involves enormous additional complexity and years of rigorous safety testing. Meanwhile, other research groups are focused specifically on studying so-called superagers, a relatively small population of elderly individuals who somehow maintain remarkably sharp cognitive function and physical health well into their 80s and 90s, seemingly without the typical decline. There is also an entirely separate branch of the immortality conversation worth mentioning here, one that moves beyond biology entirely and into the realm of technology. Some researchers and futurists have proposed that even if biological immortality remains impossible, a form of digital continuation might eventually become achievable through detailed mapping and preservation of human brain activity, memories, and personality patterns. Most serious neuroscientists remain deeply skeptical that current technology is anywhere close to achieving this. Bringing this back to the original disturbing answer attributed to Grok, it becomes clear why this particular question captured so much attention online. It sits precisely at the intersection of cutting-edge biological research, enormous ongoing financial investment from powerful tech figures, and deeply personal existential anxiety that essentially every human being quietly carries throughout their entire life. When an AI system trained on vast amounts of scientific literature is asked to synthesize all of this information honestly, the resulting answer inevitably reflects both the genuine progress being made in longevity science and the very real biological walls that progress has not yet managed to break through. Perhaps what disturbed people most was not the specific scientific details Grok reportedly provided, but rather the calm, matter-of-fact tone in which those details were delivered. There was no dramatic framing, no comforting reassurance, and no speculative promise about future breakthroughs solving everything. Just a clear, evidence-based summary of where the science currently stands, delivered with the same measured tone an AI might use to explain photosynthesis or answer a simple math question. For many people, encountering mortality discussed this plainly without any emotional cushioning proved far more unsettling than any dramatic prediction about robots or artificial superintelligence ever could. This ultimately circles back to something worth remembering every time an artificial intelligence system is asked a deeply personal or existential question. These systems do not possess mystical insight into the human condition. They function by synthesizing enormous quantities of existing research, data, and expert opinion into a coherent conversational response. When that underlying research happens to point toward uncomfortable conclusions, the AI's answer will naturally carry that same discomfort. Not because it has discovered some hidden truth humans have missed, but because it is accurately reflecting decades of careful scientific study that most people simply never take the time to read for themselves. That is the full story behind the question that reportedly disturbed scientists when it was put directly to an artificial intelligence system. The uncomfortable truth about human aging, the biological walls we have not yet found a way around, and the genuine scientific progress being made toward a longer, healthier life, even if true immortality remains firmly out of reach for now. If you learned something new today, let us know in the comments which scientific mystery you want us to investigate next.